Good morning. We are about to start. We are just making the final audio adjustments and checking the Zoom webinar. Dear Haisan, heads of services that are here today, representatives from the IDB, deans, and the UAE community, representatives from the partner institutions of the Ethical Algorithms Project, and everyone who is present here today and through the Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a central milestone for the project, and it's 3 years. Today we will have two prestigious speakers visiting from Europe, where artificial intelligence regulation is most advanced. We will learn about the regulatory tools and methodologies that we have developed in Chile along with the partners of the project in order to address the risks of this technology. So before we start, I invite you to watch a video that summarizes the 3 years of the Ethical Algorithms Project. Our ambition is we want to define an ethical framework in order to be more effective when we reach citizens. From the IDB, we are convinced that Latin America and the Caribbean need innovative and ethical and responsible solutions. In this project, we are closing the first execution stage. In these 3 years, we have been able to test what it really means to implement the principles of ethics in transparency, non-discrimination, data protection, and responsibility. And we have achieved this thanks to our partners who dare to develop pilots and guides to implement ethical standards and in automated systems and artificial intelligence. The digital governance not only has to develop standards, but also practical guides, so innovators can have a methodology. Public bodies are moving forward in buying algorithms, and the idea is to collaborate from the public procurement system with standard terms. And we are working with funds to add ethical considerations when awarding funds. We have developed pilots with the Council for Transparency, with the National Health Fund, to test different tools to implement algorithms, and we are assessing the results in order to make better use of these methodologies. We went to regions, we went to Puerto Montt and Antofagasta in order to disseminate and hold workshops and promote the tools that allow the public and private sector to do ethical algorithms. We are in Los Lagos with students and even people from other regions, and I think these occasions help us safeguard privacy and data protection in everything related to artificial intelligence in Chile. We are in Antofagasta. We think it's very relevant to talk about these issues and have direct contact with the different institutions that are working on public transparency and algorithmic transparency as well. The ethical algorithms is a project that is is working on the ethical frameworks that we need to work on in order to implement artificial intelligence in state agencies in order to safeguard the well-being of everyone. Now we are starting a new stage in order to continue to find solutions for challenges that more than technological are profoundly human. A round of applause for the production of this video. It's been 3 years of this project, and as you can see, it's been a lot of work with many actors involved, both from the public and the private world, in an effort led by Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez. Now we invite our rector, Harold Bayer, to provide his welcome words. Good morning, everyone. I know that for the minister, these issues are very important, so we are very happy that she's here today. I also want to say hello to the Dean of the School of Government and the different directors of the public or bodies who are here today. And of course the IDB and also the director of GovLab. She has been promoting this project relentlessly. I also want to say hello to all the academics and heads of departments from the university. Some ideas that I wanted to talk about. As you know, this project is named Ethical, Responsible, and Transparent Algorithms. It's 3 years old, and it started at the end of 2020 in a moment that it was kind of strange to talk about these issues. It was a different context, but without a doubt, today, 3 years later, we know the impact and also the risks involved in implementing these algorithms in decision making. This project would not have been possible without the support and the funding of the IDB Lab. So we are thankful to them. And also without the enthusiasm of various public services who have been challenged to use the information better and also use it in an ethical and responsible manner. And through this, implementations achieve a better use of technology on one hand, but also more proximity with the citizens. So the state can make all the available information and use it to provide better services to citizens. In a way, can you understand me? In a way, the challenge of the state, but also for the private sector, is to use this information with a purpose, with meaning, with a sense of responsibility, and always seeking to bring citizens closer to what the state is doing, but also to provide them the decisions that they need. Across the world, there is lots of challenges. The state is quite challenged to better connect with the citizens and based on their needs and requirements. So this requires moving forward to a greater connection with the needs and the quality of the services provided by the state and also by companies in a wider sense. I think that artificial intelligence has this tremendous opportunity to produce this connection in a wiser way than other instruments. Based on data. Data is nothing else than interactions among humans and nature, human, and the universe. And based on this, we can build better solutions, better ways to advance these needs. Today, I think that citizens noticed and saw what artificial intelligence meant maybe a year ago. And somehow the population saw what was happening and connected, and at the same time saw the great potential of artificial intelligence and how it also generates a lot of questions. What's going to happen with artistic creations, for example, but also in other fields. Universities are quite challenged with the use of the GPT chat by students. So we need to make a productive use of these tools. And this is just a small indicator of the potential of artificial intelligence. And in the case of the state, this accumulation of data is happening. And how can this data help us make better decisions? And this is an opportunity that we cannot pass. And the rhythm it is moving so fast that we need to have good coordination between the private and the public sector and also the academia in order to provide answers and respond to these challenges in an ethical and responsible way. Our university's mission is always to properly combine freedom to create, to do things differently with responsibility. And how do we achieve this balance also in public decision making? And how they use this data to provide better services, but we need to do this in an ethical way. And this is quite a challenge, not only in the public sector, but in every organizations. And with this project, the university and the GOB Lab and the different public services that have worked here wanted to move forward in order to define standards that can be useful for the future and, of course, for the present, that allow them to strengthen democracy and be closer to citizens and help this process through a good application of artificial intelligence algorithms for solving problems. In this sense, everybody has collaborated in this project. I want to thank you, the Ministry of Science, the Digital Government Division, ChileCompra, the Council for Transparency, the National Health Fund, the Public Criminal Defender's Office, and also Magical. This joint work is just starting, and it has showed how we need to work collaboratively in the future as a society with the public and private sector. And as a university, in this sense, we are willing to continue and keep collaborating to find new projects and find elements that allow us to make sure that these tools and new technologies are really at the service of the citizens in a proper way. Just to finish, just a small example of how these algorithms can be distorted. I will talk. Well, in the world today, we have many companies that are selecting their staff without asking for a university degree. This is a recent trend. They're looking for talent in a more diverse manner, so they select uh, uh, positions without a degree. And many of these companies have developed algorithms to make a pre-selection of the candidates. But in practice, they are receiving candidates who do have degrees, and the algorithms use mechanisms to discriminate with criteria that are more associated to people with degrees than people without university degrees. So they don't achieve their purpose. There's a whole discussion about that today. They're trying to improve the algorithms to find a solution to this problem. Some examples are Accenture and other companies trying to, and this shows that the purposes that we have are not always materialized due to the problems involved in the development and the ethical discussion regarding these technologies. So I think this is quite a challenge for everybody involved, and the invitation is to keep thinking together and working together on these in order to make sure that we are applying these tools correctly. So thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you, Dean. As you were mentioning, ethical algorithm is thanks to the BIT Lab, the innovation lab from the IDB Group. That's why we have a regards from Florencia de Witt, its representative. Morning, everyone. Almost 3 years ago, we signed an agreement with the UAI to start implementation this initiative that has financing from our innovation lab, the BIT Lab, with its main focus is to incorporate ethical principles that are responsible when developing automated decision systems. This initiative look to achieve two main goals. First, to transform technology in a responsible manner so it was differentiated and generates opportunity for the markets for IT companies, especially startups and medium-sized companies. And secondly, to develop mechanism to allow to use ethical algorithm was the basis for every project where there was procurement for algorithms that were to be bought by public organism in Chile. So we started this flagpole project where we work with the same object goals in all throughout the region in Latin America and the Caribbean, focusing in developing innovation under ethical and responsible frameworks as a formula to develop and to solve social problems and environmental problems that are plaguing our countries, helping better services for the citizenry, especially for the most vulnerable population, mitigating risk from potential bias and discriminations. 3 years after we began, our experience in Chile, first in the region, has tools, processes, and practices that are concrete and that allow us to create enabling conditions to keep expanding these laws in the country can be replicated in other countries. So we like to congratulate Adolfo Ibáñez University for being leaders in such a vital issue and the Ministry of Science that is helping ethical development of algorithms, and we as the IDB are completely committed and to each partnered society that implemented a pilot that allow us to learn quite a lot to develop the tools that will allow us to adopt these ethical principles that will be there for the private and public sector to use. We thank you and we wish you success in this day. Thank you. Thank, thank to all the BitLab team, especially Carolina Carrasco, and Cesar, who will be there. One of the partners that allow us is the Ministry of Science and in Innovation Department. So we invite the Minister Aysen Echeverri. Hello, good morning. Thank you very much for having us. As the Dean mentioned, this is a particularly interesting issue for me, so I'm very glad to speak about artificial intelligence. As I listened to the Dean before, I was thinking on how fast time goes by and how significant the content during that time is. I would like to reference three times during the last 4 years that I believe are milestone in this evolution and how we have evolved as a country. The first point, and Maria Paz may remember this, when we were developing AI policy, and when we get together before the pandemic in another building, and we're at a point we have a very deep discussion about whether algorithm and database were biased, and a lot of us stood up and said, of course they're biased, and the other half of the expert argued that they couldn't, that they were objective, and thus this was a non-issue that happened 4 years ago. A second moment that came to mind that during the CTI Council, I was asked to go to an AI event. ChatGPT was brand new, and we were preparing words. I asked ChatGPT to make a framework for the scientists according to the quality of their science, according to gender and race. It made a beautiful table where the most capable were white men, and their white black men, then white women, then black women, which is a table full of bias. Then a third moment, we have the opportunity of having the General Secretary of the UN in Antarctic, and he has pushed the IA issue and ethical usage of it at a global level, and its concern was no longer whether there was bias or not. It wasn't whether we were to do algorithm or not, but it's his concern was how do we think developing humanity and human interaction and developing communities with such a dissociative tool like this. So why these three moments come to mind? This happened in 4 years, and during 4 years, all of this has happened, and so it makes me think to be very receptive of what will happen. And the same happened with internet back in the day. Countries have two choices. They sit down and look at what's going on, or they get on the train and be part of the discussion and try to be or try to make laws that make sense to them. And in the case of I think we have achieved the second. And when we think of what has happened in Chile, we not only were able to publish this law, but also we have major investment in artificial intelligence. It is not trivial. Companies have the infrastructure. We continue to work in connectivity that enables developing AIs. We also have research. When you look at the 10 years, there's more than 80 million pesos invested in the development. When we compare to Europe, can be very little, but for our reality, these numbers are quite high. So at a more international policy level, we have called from Chile a summit from regional and Caribbean countries so we can talk about ethics in AI, a discussion that is a priority of our government. Our president president in the UN mentioned how this topic was very relevant for Chile and how we were working, maybe not to lead, but to coordinate a discussion, sorry, from the developing countries, because we have to see how we can participate in this space that's already underway in other countries. So there's countless initiatives, and this is one of them. And I think this is have a, make has achieved in moving the public space. When you see the list of services that are part of this project, and I know a few of them, I'm sure this project shook the basis of many institutions, made them think on a different manner, to organize their team in a different manner, and this clearly improves the institution and improves the services that we deliver as government. It also improves as the welfare of the people, which is at the end of the day what we are trying to achieve. I would like to close with a thought that this is not cannot have an answer, and we're working on it. But university is a good place to bring out question. A while ago, I was shown a project. I cannot think of the name right now, from somebody that worked with Google Maps, and he had historical repository of Google Maps, and then he showed how cities disappeared, cities that existed when war countries were replaced by other cities, and what was left was a road in the middle of nowhere, and it was complete stories of people that lived there, histories of that space that went away because data was eliminated, and this in our daily interaction, then we forgot about the cities. So that project made me think about not only what we forget, because data disappear, and we only get the new data and what we use for new IA, and IA does not remember, but also memories that do not generate data. And today we have a major number of people that do not generate data because of the digital gap, connectivity issues, and their stories, their life experiences, their practices, their languages disappear when we use these tools, and are not think when we use artificial intelligence. So what happens with that gap, and what should we do? We should think about that impact. Not only how there's gender or race bias, but there's a more deep bias that related to how our countries develop, and this is reflected in the participation that we have as people in the digital world, and this should also be a part of the discussion, and the discussion that we also should have as a society, and how we use this kind of tool. Well, I would like to congratulate this project, Maria Paz in particular, because I think this exists because of their drive and push and commitment with the issue, and I hope that we have many years to come in this project, and we include more organization and more of the government, so we can continue to grow in an ethical manner. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. And before we start with the presentations, I would like to tell you two things. First, we have enabled a Menti, so you can do questions for our speakers and for later panels. So scan this QR code so you can do your uh, put your question there. And the second data is that the next talk will have simultaneous interpretation with the devices that you grab when you signed in. So you can set those up right now. And while you scan, we will go deep into automated system with Daniel Howden, a British journalist, general management, and founder of Lighthouse Reports, a non-profit organization who has won many awards, and he has told us how, through an algorithm audit, we're able to see bias in a Rotterdam public service, a story that helps us to reflect in the role that the different actors have, and the design, implementation, and usage of artificial intelligence when we give services for the population. Daniel, welcome, and please take it away.
Ese micrófono está más o menos, ¿no? ¿Ah? Okay.
So, let's go back one. So it's a huge pleasure to be here today to talk to you all. I'd like to thank the organizers, the university, Maria, for the invitation. I should also apologize for speaking in English, so I hope the simultaneous translation is working for you. I'm going to just signal the translators up there. Do this if I'm going too quickly, but I'm sure that you're more than capable. So I'm going to talk to you today about a specific story, but I'm also going to tell a little bit the story of the interaction between journalists and policymakers. So, as I said, it is lovely to be here. It's also really nice to have your attention. And it's even nicer to have that attention without having had to send a Freedom of Information request in order to get it, which is the usual way that these things go. When I was invited to come and speak to you initially, I was a little puzzled. I'm very used to speaking to journalists. In recent years, I've become more and more used to speaking to technologists. But I'm more accustomed to asking policymakers and regulators questions than I am to be given the opportunity to give speeches to them. So this is a nice change. Let's hope I can use the chance well. But as I see it, I'm here to tell a story, and that story has a meaning for journalists. It can be important for technologists, but I think it's most important of all for the people who are going to purchase and deploy and ultimately regulate automated decision-making systems, which are on behalf of the public. So, as I said, I am a journalist. I'm not a technologist. And when I reach the limits of what I'm comfortable describing from what my team does and what we produce as Lighthouse, I'll be totally honest and clear about that. But hopefully, my not being a technologist is going to make what I talk about today a little bit more accessible for a general audience. I'm sure that there are some people in the room who have a data science background and grounding, and therefore some of what I'm going to say is quite simple. But hopefully I can pitch it in a way that's interesting for everybody in the room. Now, at Lighthouse, we do have a small team of technologists, but hopefully I can also make it clear as we go through today that most of what we do is reproducible without the benefit of data scientists. But some of it does need them. Now, my job has been to build a team who are capable of interrogating this technology and pointing that team at the most important public interest issues of our time, of which this is very much one. Now, among these is the creeping deployment of automated decision-making systems or algorithms. I'm going to argue that it is the job of journalists to report on the expanding use of algorithms in the public sector. And I'm also going to argue that there is a strong relationship between transparency, scrutiny, and the delivery of public services, which is ultimately what most people in this room are most motivated to do, I imagine. I'm going to take us, before we go to the Netherlands, I'd like to go briefly to Norway to make a point. So Norway, as some of you will know, currently sits at the top of the World Press Freedom Index. So its press laws, its media ownership, etc., are considered to be the best in the world. Norway is also has probably the most advanced transparency laws in the world. It passed the Transparency Act in 2022, which guarantees a very, very high level of access for citizens, but also for journalists to all kinds of public information. But at the same time, Norway is also top of the OECD measures on citizen satisfaction in government and delivery of key public services. And the reason I say such nice things about Norway or pointing these things out is because I think that really speaks to the fact that there isn't a contradiction between the efficient delivery of public services and the transparency and responsiveness to scrutiny, which I'm going to talk about today. Unfortunately, my experience as a journalist tells me that there is an innate suspicion that opening up is going to lead to massive workloads and slow down the basic job of government. And I would give the example of Norway as evidence that that is not actually the case. So before I say too much more, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Lighthouse, who we are, and why that might qualify us to have something interesting to say to you today. So Lighthouse is a non-profit newsroom we set up 4 years ago. We are spread all around the world, but we have small clusters in the Netherlands and Greece. So I would say that we were born in Europe, but now we're beginning to grow out of Europe. We're actively working all around the world. We work on cross-border investigations. So what that means in practice is that we work on investigations that are relevant in more than one country. We divide our work up into different, so our topic areas, the stuff that we cover, the themes that we address, we call them newsrooms. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is the work of our surveillance newsroom. And to give you a sense of what Lighthouse is, we're not a publishing platform. So our stories live their best lives on the media that we work with. We're an investigations team, so at any given time in a Lighthouse investigation, there are several journalists from other outlets working with us. So why would Wired magazine in the US or Le Monde in France or El País choose to come and work with Lighthouse? Well, we have some hard skills which you don't tend to find in newsrooms. Those include open source intelligence analysts, data scientists, experts in public records. It tends to be that in Europe we refer to freedom of information requests, but in the US and in many other countries those are just referred to as either access to information or public records. I'm going to talk a bit about that today, but also visual forensics and financial money trails. Here is a little picture of our team. There are something like, I think 14 nationalities up on that board there. So we are very much an international team, and we have people based from Tucson in Arizona to Chiang Mai in Thailand. So we have no inherent focus necessarily on Europe. Now, this enormous board of splatter here is a cross-section of the media brands that we've worked with. It's probably changed again this morning because we've had a couple of investigations published in the last 2 days, one of which I'll talk to you about a little bit today if we have time. But the point here is that we are working with a lot of different, we're working with television stations, with podcasters, with individual content influencers, but also with some of the most important established media around the world. So what I'm going to talk to you about in more detail today is how journalists address a problem like reporting on an algorithm. Now, my own personal story in this, I've spent much of my career as a foreign correspondent. which basically means you're telling people in one place about another place. Typically that was with international media, often UK-based, so I've worked with Reuters, I've worked with The Economist, The Guardian, The Independent, but I came to the area of algorithmic accountability reporting with basically 4 years ago almost no clue at all what I was doing. So for anyone in the room who is unfamiliar with addressing algorithms, I was you very, very recently, and I haven't forgotten how confusing it can feel. So what we wanted to do was initially to break down what it was that we were addressing and figure out what we would need to ask for, what analysis we would do, and how that could feed other more traditional forms of reporting. So I'm just going to take you through the life cycle of an algorithm, and what I'm describing is just as applicable to policing, criminal justice, healthcare, many other forms. So we start with the input features. This is the variables that are going to be used to produce the risk score. Then we have the training data. Essentially, this is what the algorithm learns from. And in many senses, that's where the issue of bias and discrimination, which I'm going to talk about a bit, and Rafaela is also going to talk about from a slightly different perspective later. Then we have the model type. This is the thing which everyone has become very excited about recently. So this is where machine learning comes into this. We're also going to address performance, which I think is a critical question for everyone in this room. Does it actually do the job that it's meant to? And then is the question of fairness. Disparate impact, a frightening term, it actually just means bias. Is there disparate impact on vulnerable people? So this was something that we put out just before we released a series that ultimately came to be called Suspicion Machines. As I said, there are predictive algorithms being used in the criminal justice system for purposes like deciding on whether people should be given parole or not. They're being used in sentencing as, to assist judges in deciding how long people are going to be put in jail for, or what the risk of reoffending is. Those systems, despite many of our best efforts, and some of those efforts are ongoing, are almost completely locked down. What we decided to focus our energy on in the end was welfare systems, and what I would refer to as welfare surveillance. It's the collection of very large very large volumes of data about some of the most vulnerable people in society, and then the use of that to calculate risk scores and the deployment of those basically fraud detection systems. So we focused on 8 countries. This is a little bit out of date. There's probably around 150 Freedom of Information access requests made. We published on Monday in France, which is the latest in a series which has also taken in reporting from the Netherlands, from Denmark, Serbia, and Spain. There's more to come from Sweden, Germany, and Norway. And our reporting on this welfare surveillance focus on tech, people, politics, and business. There's a selection of some of the people that we published with there. But the main story, which came out, feels almost like a lifetime ago, but it was actually just earlier this year, was reported with Vesperton, which is a Metro newsroom in Rotterdam itself, but also with Wired magazine, which many of you will know is one of the leading technology magazines in the world. And it focused in on Rotterdam we chose Rotterdam because of all of the places in which we sought access to information. We got the most out of Rotterdam, and they've been described as the accidental hero of this story, because the final key to being able to unlock a story about Rotterdam was something that they gave us completely by accident, which I'll explain. Okay, sorry. There we go. Is this one not working? Actually, it's probably... It's working? Okay, I can come close to this one. Let me know if the two microphones start to speak to each other. So, I'm going to give you a zoom through this story. Every year, the city of Rotterdam puts thousands of people through, thousands of its welfare recipients under investigation. That has always been the case, but in 2017, something changed, and the city began to use, to select those welfare recipients for fraud investigations by using an algorithm. You see there where the cutoff point was, and people above that risk score would come under investigation. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means, but just know that fraud controllers in the Netherlands have more powers than the police. So when they come into your life and you're put under investigation, it turns your life upside down. Okay. So we're going to have a little look here at how risk rankings work, and talk about why certain scores land in the way that they do. It should be said that the Rotterdam algorithm is relatively sophisticated. It uses 315 variables to assign each person a risk score. People over a certain cutoff point then get investigated. So by reconstructing the system and testing it, we were able to show both why the system had fundamental flaws, why it didn't work, but also why it discriminated based on ethnicity and gender. If I could just get the gentleman back here a second, because I'd like to take you into one section of the story, if that's possible. I can probably just do it from here myself. There we go. Can you click this link? Yeah. Click this link. Great. I'll just take us down into the story a little bit. There we go. So I want to introduce you to the way that we did this in order to demonstrate how this works. I'm going to fly through the top of the story, and then I will come out of it a little bit. We're going to meet Sarah. Okay. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. So in addressing this, the complication was that it's really difficult to explain what's going on inside an algorithm. So what we did was create an archetype, in this case, Sarah. So Sarah is a hypothetical single mother of 2 children, recently broken up with her partner. One of her sons fell ill 4 months ago. She quit her job to take care of him. She now runs out of money to pay her bills before the end of each month. At the last meeting, Sarah's caseworker noted in her file that clothing, makeup, and/or hairstyle unsuitable for job applications. So this is a subjective reading by a caseworker, and it's recorded in as one of the data points, and it's a 1 or a 0. So having anything recorded in their comments from a caseworker was immediately weighted as a negative. So anything that they would choose to put. We're going to go down a little bit, and then we'll meet Yusuf. Yusuf speaks Arabic, which the the algorithm doesn't like. So here's another hypothetical Rotterdam resident. Yusuf immigrated to the Netherlands from Iraq. Currently lives in Rotterdam neighborhood with a large migrant population, shares a flat with other Iraqis that he met since he arrived in the city. He has not passed his Dutch language exam. He was a teacher in Iraq, but he can't get his qualifications recognized in the Netherlands, trying to get work on the docks, and so physical work. And yet Yusuf's caseworker notes that he shows subjectively no active desire to achieve results. So what we were picking apart here is how you go from having a very low risk, so let's just get rid of that, a very low risk profile. So before we see Sarah, just imagine for a second that Sarah is a man with all of the same profile. That man, if that is a standard Dutch guy, sits right in the middle of there, is never going to be investigated under any circumstances. So we start to change some things about this man. So a typical 30-year-old male born in Rotterdam receives social welfare to make ends meet. He ranks at 16,815 on the list. So he's got to go up another 10,000 places to get investigated. So let's turn this man, who we'll call Klaas, into Sarah. Immediately, she's up 4,542 spots, closer to a possible investigation. Now, let's give Klaas, who has become Sarah, 2 children, and she would move another 2,134 spaces up the list. Let's make her single, but coming out of long-term relationships. That's another 3,267 spots. Struggling to pay bills, which is a common feature of people who are on welfare and may be completely unconnected to any possibility of fraud, but up nearly 2,000 places. So for this algorithm, the typical male welfare beneficiary in Rotterdam is now identical to Sarah, but is and therefore is going to be investigated for benefits fraud. So I'm going to come out of here and back into the presentation. I just wanted to show you how distinctions work inside the algorithm and how this data translates into different outcomes for otherwise similar people. So what you see there is building on a tradition of reporting. The story that most of you will be aware of, or is the origins of algorithmic accountability reporting for most, is machine bias, which was a major piece done by the US nonprofit ProPublica now 7 years ago. And it took apart an algorithm that was used to predict reoffending rates and was shown to have strong racial discrimination in it. In order to do this kind of work, journalists like me are going to come to people like some of the people in this room and ask them for access to information on the systems that they've deployed. What are they going to ask for and why? Well, in the investigation that you've just had a look inside, that requires full access to the algorithm. Excuse me, sorry, the screen's just gone. There we go, is it coming back? There we go. Yeah, it's going to require full access to the algorithm, source code, machine learning model, training data, technical documentation. So that will mean that will come to you in the form of public records request, freedom access to information. Okay. Then we would need to do what we did, which is to set up an experiment to test for bias. And then it's the more traditional reporting, which is that we track down the people who become the targets of this system and find ways to tell their stories. These are the steps we need to take. Now, I've noticed that in Chile, you really like QR codes. So I popped one in here for you. If you point your device at that QR code, that will give you the full requests that we sent through. So these are all the information that we asked Rotterdam for, in case that's useful for you to understand. But I'll just briefly summarize it. the machine learning model file. So you'll remember from the algorithm lifecycle where that sits. The full source code used to train the model, that's distinct from the training data. The documents containing the full set of input features. I won't read through the whole list, but I'll give you a minute or so to take a look at that. Actually, no, with translation, probably it makes sense for me to read through. Documents containing the full set of input features. So these are the variables. The code books, data dictionaries. So these are the documents that actually tell you what those variables mean. Some of those variables make immediate sense. Others wouldn't make any sense to people who didn't put this together. Then we want technical documentation related to any algorithm or code used to build the predictive model. Handbooks or other manuals for how end users, so in this case the case workers for instance, should interpret and act upon the outputs. We want the documents containing tests and evaluations of the model and its behavior. So these are the kinds of tests that will have been conducted to validate. And then we want the training data, which we're going to talk about. And obviously we want any data protection, privacy, human rights impact assessments. So I've put battle twice in this slide because it was what I described. So we got the majority of these things from Rotterdam, but we were missing something super important. And the kinds of objections that we get to asking for this information, it's always pretty much the same objection. We can't give you this much information because if it were to be published, this could be used to game the system. In no instance of algorithmic accountability reporting that we've done is this in any way possible or true. Considering that the system is primarily searching for people who do not speak Dutch or English, the chances that people could take the reporting that we're doing and reconstruct that into a means to game the system, it's basically almost completely out of the question. Now, what we really need in order to understand how this is put together and to report on it is access to the training data. But there are genuine data protection and privacy constraints there, which I would say in some instances, obviously we would respect. Typically, there are workarounds for this. There are older versions of the system. The training data is available in aggregate form, so it's depersonalized. And you can make arrangements with the journalists to ensure that any training data that they do receive is then deleted after publication. So initially the answer from Rotterdam was no, and we got this nice chart that you see here. What they didn't realize was that in the HTML of that chart was the entire of the training data set. So the histogram that you see contains HTML code which had a whole training data set. So we basically had everything that we needed to do this. We took advice from privacy lawyers and we obviously then set up a function to store that data securely and delete it after the investigation was published. And we notified Rotterdam that they had done this. We also had the incredible challenge of building out the human story. The affected communities here, as you can imagine, experience very strong levels of distrust. So finding people in communities that had been disproportionately targeted by the algorithm and getting them to trust us and to tell their stories. We also needed them to take advantage of European laws and make subject access requests, which I'm going to leave to Raffaele to talk to you about more because I've got 10 minutes to go. This is the experiment that we conducted, and I'll share a link to this presentation at the end so people can look at this in more detail. So we were looking at, from the group that hadn't been flagged for fraud, do women receive higher scores than men? From the group that had been flagged, do women receive higher scores than men because of their gender? We had to, the interaction of the variables is complicated and non-linear, so we made two copies of the training data, one where everyone is a man and one where everyone is a woman, in order to try to understand this. And we were looking for differences in average scores. And what you can see here is how in the highest decile of risk scores, what the difference is between people who spoke with native languages and people who spoke other languages. So this algorithm was looking for people who was basically trying to make guesses about people's ethnicity. I won't, given the time that we have, we don't have to spend too much time here, but basically we ended up trying to solve this complication by using the archetypes that I showed you before. So what does this mean in practice? You take two people, you have a 50-year-old single Dutch man with no children. His risk score is never going to go, I mean, risk scores are between 1 and 0, but it's easier if we times it by 100 in order to make it more understandable. His risk score was 27 out of 100. He was never going to be investigated. 30-year-old mother of migration background, her risk score went to 67 out of 100, and the algorithm would almost certainly flag her for investigation. What did Rotterdam think it was buying? This was one of the questions that we had from the outset. And this is what was promised to them by Accenture. In its simplest terms, advanced analytics and machine learning was going to give them unbiased citizen outcomes. That's what they thought they were buying. The former alderman, so one of the people involved in the purchase, who under different circumstances might be sitting in a room amongst the people here, Richard Motti, in answer to us, said there was no bias in inputs or outputs of the algorithm. And they thought reasonably that they were going to unlock huge value through a sophisticated data-driven approach. And that's what they were being sold by Accenture. Here's what they actually got. What you're looking at there is a line that essentially shows you that there's no difference in the performance of this algorithm, no meaningful difference between that and a random outcome. Leading AI, one of the world's leading AI experts, Margaret Mitchell, has been at this for 10 years, was part of an academic panel who reviewed our methodology, and she called the system essentially a random guessing machine. The training data shows that other methods work better than the model ever did. So when we take on complex analysis like this, we share our methodology with a panel of academics and experts in a similar way to the way that universities would. And that methodology is published in full online, and our code is available for highly engaged audience to reproduce. This is the data team that did this and continue to work with us, and are going to be available to working with journalists in this region, we hope, quite soon. Here are some stories that we did in following up on this. The story in Le Monde, which is badly represented on that slide, is out yesterday. So this is the front page of Le Monde yesterday morning. We're investigating the CNAF, which is the social security system in France. It's an algorithm that ranks and scores half of the population in France. It's known informally as the monster, and people have been trying to understand how it works since it was deployed 10 years ago. What you see on the right is a story that we did with El Confidencial in Spain on an algorithm that was used to calculate the risk of fraud and cheating in sickness benefits. In both instances, we found the deployment of really bad technology that was both failing in terms of performance and has clear discriminatory outcomes. So as we wrap up, I was trying to think about some lessons from today's conversations. Lesson number one, journalists will find a way. So I would always say that it's better to get out in front of these things and to set up a form of transparency. And even when we don't find that form of transparency in front of us, we'll find another way to do it. And that's always going to be the case. Full disclosure proved to be really valuable. Rotterdam now see themselves and are seen widely as a leader in transparency as a result of this. The methodology that we use from suspicion machines is already out there. We have done more than 30 different trainings around the world to different journalists on how to do this kind of reporting. So it's out there in the wild. I give the example of Amsterdam, who subsequent to this reporting, the city of Amsterdam came to us and gave us unprecedented access to test their own ethical AI system. This doesn't have to be an antagonistic relationship. You can have great technology, or you can have an honest effort at ethical AI, and you can invite in journalists and others to assess that in a positive frame. Rotterdam has subsequently dropped plans to replace its welfare surveillance algorithm with a more sophisticated one. And we managed to find out, ironically, through a Freedom of Information request, that these plans were dropped because of media attention. So it can be that potentially bad decisions are mitigated by doing this. I wanted to publish this response in full. This is from Rotterdam's Director of Work and Income, another person who under different circumstances could be in the room with us today. We consider it very important that other governments and organizations are aware of the risks of using algorithms. We decided to give you maximum insight into the model, not only because of our desire to be an open and transparent organization, but also to be able to learn from the insights of others. And this kind of exchange and learning, I think, is the main thing that I was hoping to get out of today. And with that, before Maria can lift that last card, it's time to hear some questions and see. Happy to answer anything that you might have to ask.
Gracias, Daniel. Seguro a muchos se les están ocurriendo algunas preguntas para poder profundizar. Tenemos 10 minutos y nos va a acompañar César Rosales, coordinador de FairLab, de IDB Lab, que viajó desde España para estar con nosotros, para que facilite este segmento de preguntas y respuestas. Les invitamos a tomar asiento.
Gracias. Sí, me escuchan. Well, thank you so much, Daniel, for this very instructive presentation that you had, and the incredible and unique research that you are conducting at Lighthouse Reports. I have a question for you. In the Rotterdam case that is included in the series of Suspicion Machine, was featured by Wired, this started because you had access to the algorithms and the data, mostly of what you just mentioned, the willingness of the government to provide you with this information, rather than a series of policies related to transparency or access to information. No? So it seems that this is one of the major challenges when analyzing and assessing these kind of systems. And I'd like to know what's your take on this, and do you think that access to information is the main barrier, or there are other significant barriers to these assessments?
I think it's useful to acknowledge that these deployments are new to all of us. We have this conversation in a general environment of incredible hype and urgency around AI, not much of which is completely justified. There is this giant distraction going on where AI is going to fix everything, or it's going to kill all of us. And it's very hard in that kind of hyperbolic atmosphere to have a sensible discussion about what AI or even just basic non-AI algorithmic systems are doing in our lives right now and how they're affecting people right now. So challenge number one is to cut through the hype and this kind of excessive urgency. The second challenge really is access to information. I was excited at the idea of coming to Chile because it seems that, thanks to some of the people in this room, there is a real moment in terms of an opening towards transparency. The pilot of the algorithmic register, I think, is a really positive step. And I really hope to see, I'd be hoping to see that this is followed up on, and then it becomes policy. I've been pleased to note some of the things that are happening here with the Transparency Council, and I understand that there will be a data protection law is going to take a next step towards becoming law, at least an update on the data protection law. And as I understand it, Chile already has, on paper at least, quite strong freedom of information. These access to information laws are critical, but it's also the responsibility of journalists to really exercise these laws. I mean, these are muscles that atrophy, they're muscles that waste away when they're not being used. And I do think, as I said in the presentation, that there's a really positive relationship between really good outcomes from public services and public agencies and scrutiny from journalists. It's journalists' job to keep the process honest.
Thank you so much. And just try to build on what you mentioned about the hype and the speed of this technology in being present. So this algorithmic testing or audit that you conducted is pretty unique and unprecedented worldwide, precisely because of what you mentioned, the high speed by which AI has permeated most aspects of decision making in the public and the private sectors, in combination with the lack of knowledge and resources capabilities to actually conduct these kind of testings is not too widespread, perhaps as of now. That is to say, while artificial intelligence is advancing strongly in all areas, the control and accountability is only incipient. So I'd like to ask you, what steps do you think that actors should take to generate this kind of accountability mechanisms so that it becomes more robust and structured?
It's not an easy question to answer, but I'm going to go back a little bit to the hype. And a special feature of the AI hype that we have at the moment is this assertion that AI is a completely unique category of technology and that it can't possibly be regulated, and that if it is going to be regulated, the only people who could tell you how it should be regulated are the vendors and the creators of this technology, or the drivers of this, the businesses behind this in the first place. And whenever I hear something like this, I try to think, okay, where have I heard this before? So it's not unusual when any new business model emerges that the originators of that business model will cast themselves as the future and policymakers and regulators as the past, hopelessly left behind and unable to understand or usefully engage with this incredible new thing. It's a smaller example, but I would point to Airbnb. Airbnb emerged. It presented itself as this kind of scruffy avatar of the sharing economy. Couldn't be regulated. You'd be damaging this thing which was organic and was building relationships across the world and wasn't really about money anyway. Until it became a very, very big business. It turned the rental markets in cities upside down. It had a huge impact on the hospitality sector. It pushed vulnerable populations out of city centers. It collapsed businesses because of changed patterns in urban centers. And it made a handful of people an enormous amount of money. What did they spend that enormous amount of money on? Well, they spent a lot of it on lobbyists to specifically go and make arguments against standard forms of regulation being applied to their model. So what I see at the moment are similar kind of ambassadors from the future, coming to talk to regulators about how they really shouldn't be regulated because you're going to be slowing everything down, and you're going to prevent the incredible, miraculous things that this is going to deliver. And I think that there are fairly simple arguments that can be made. I mean, the obvious one is to do with medicines. It would be perfectly possible to imagine a pharmaceutical company that wanted to tell you that they have a new miracle drug and that it can't go through testing because the world can't wait, and that people are dying as a consequence of waiting for regulators to examine medical trials. If you imagine now that a new pharmaceutical industry was suddenly born overnight, you could imagine all of these arguments being made. You transpose the AI lobby for the pharmaceuticals lobby, and they would be arguing that we can't have these cumbersome medical trials, we cannot have academics and others interfering and judging the work, and that the public should be able to benefit straight away from experimental drugs right now. I think everybody understands why that wouldn't be a very good idea. So I don't see the AI situation as any different than that. A lot of attention is obviously focused on the EU AI Act, which is coming closer to being a real thing. If I'm not an expert on technology, I'm certainly not an expert on the EU AI Act, but we have someone who's going to be talking to you in a little while. So I'm going to cede the floor to Rafaela to talk in more detail about that. But obviously, a strong example from an economically powerful club of nations could be a really very constructive thing at this moment. Hopefully, it will get across the line without too much more tinkering.
Thank you. You have some more questions? Thank you so much, Daniel.
My pleasure. Really nice to speak to you all today.
I know there were a lot of questions left in the Menti, but during the coffee break, you can ask Daniel directly because we are on time restraints. Now we will move forward to the first panel that we have, which involves the leaders of the bodies who have developed these tools. Verónica Valle, Director of ChileCompra, José Nostroza, Head of the Digital Government Division, Juan Orlandi, General Manager of Magical, Carolina Carrascos, a Leader Specialist of the IDB Lab, Cristóbal Valdivieso, Assistant Director of People Management Development of the Civil Service, and of course, Maria Pacer Masilla, GovLab Director and Head of the Ethical Algorithms Project. She will be the moderator. Welcome. I'm so happy to be here 3 years after we started this and 4 years after we had the idea. It's been a long time. So we will first start with a brief presentation of each of the tools in a pitch format, 5 minutes, where they will show the results of these tools that are already available for you. And then we will have a panel where we'll discuss this further. So we will have 3 pitches. The first one is by José Nostroza, Head of the Digital Government Division. And he will present the Ethical Formulation Guide. And then the other 2. So first we start with José Nostroza. Okay. So The digital government has the legal function to advise on uh, data and technology issues in the government. And of course, we're very happy to promote initiatives that use data and technology in order to improve services and promote innovation. And as we saw with the previous case, also we need to have good designs that balance the legality and all the potential benefits of new technologies. This is a big challenge. We need good frameworks and good strategic criteria, legal criteria, in order to make good decisions. So I think it's a very big challenge for 80 or 90% of public services. We all have to make a great effort to build these frameworks and train the teams so they can have good criteria. And within this context, the guide that was developed at Digital Government as part of this project, well, basically what it does is to manualize all the most relevant legal regulations on this matter, establishing basic concepts that are stipulated in the law. This is important because on this matter, we have a wide regulatory framework with principles that are quite basic and that have to be applied not only to this technology but to others. First, that government initiatives have to be at the service and have clear objectives and, of course, non-discriminatory for people. And this has to be evaluated at every intervention by the state. I also would say that the guide highlights the importance of using the framework, the data protection framework and privacy, with the use of sensitive data. There's a clear distinction here. Not all the data used by the government is sensitive data, so we have to be careful there. But the main difficulty has to do with that. And I would say that the GUIA provides a very didactic manual, which is very important for this state because there's a lot of regulations and things in documents that are very difficult to understand. So this is very specific work that the guide does. Frankly, I think, well, I have my doubts, and this is all. I don't know if this is going to be enough. I think we need to move beyond that, and I want to say that guides, manuals, and regulations have to be pertinent to the risk level, and the country doesn't have a clear analysis on the risks according to the type of function or the type of technology or the type of data. For example, using automated systems with documents that are low risk or using sensitive data to make judicial decisions is high risk. These are very different things. And therefore, the policies and the guides should be, from now on, more specific based on a risk matrix that we need to build together. Thank you very much, Jose. That was an excellent point. So now with Romina, we have to think about this in the next stage of the project. And think about a matrix like this. Now we will move on to Verónica Valle, Director of ChileCompra, the Chilean procurement agency, and she will talk about this tools developed by this body. Again, for those of you who know, this is the public procurement agency in Chile. Can you hear me? Yes. Hello. Good day. As Maria Paz said, I am here on behalf of ChileCompra. I've been around 6 months, but the work has been long. I am here with Gabriela, and she is the one who has been leading this project within ChileCompra. And we wanted to join and accept this invitation because, as most of you know, ChileCompra manages the public acquisition, public procurement system, but also we're working on guiding both the provider and the buyer on different forms of purchasing. And of course, ethical algorithms enter this. We are trying to introduce basic topics so both the public procurer can buy data science and algorithms by applying these ethical concepts without needing to know a lot of these topics. So we have designed two things. One are the standard bidding terms, which we designed as a standardized document that provides the general rules for acquiring any services, artificial intelligence, etc. And these standard bidding terms provide a framework on how to introduce non-discrimination, transparency, and ethical requirements and all these concepts in a technology project so that there is a standardized framework with cross-cutting and clear concepts. And this also for the providers. For them, it's also easier to be able to know how the state makes purchases, and this facilitates their participation, and the state can also have more competition and better offers. So these purchases, acquisitions have become wider at a state level, but also at a municipality level or in other agencies. And we need to take responsibility, like Jose said, of how do we ask for the development of these data analysis? How can we not allow that there is discrimination? And we also need public policies to be influenced by this new application of these ethical standards. And ultimately, because the impact is on citizens, and based on the data that we have about their interactions with the state, we have been supporting in these standard terms, which were already acknowledged by the Controller's Office. And this means that these are mandatory documents now for public agencies. So they have to be used. It doesn't mean that they're perfect. Everything can be improved in the next versions of these terms. But it provides some context so we can make acquisitions, and we also have data analysis based on clear, transparent, ethical concepts. And the other thing that we have been doing together with the university is the creation of a directive. So we will be able at some point to dictate, impose instructions. But right now we're working on a directive for data science and artificial intelligence procurement. And this provides general guidelines for the procurement of these types of services. But it's going to include other modalities. So this is what we've been working on lately, and I think maybe this week we will be have them published, and I can send them to you, Maria Paz. That's great news that we will have the procurement directive soon. We also thank all the efforts of ChileCompra, and also we need to recognize that thanks to them, we're here. They're the first service that we reached out to, and they were the first to say yes. And thanks to that, we started. So if it weren't for them, we wouldn't be here. So please, I want to ask them for a round of applause for the procurement agency. You need to be brave. And now we have our partner here from the private sector, Juan Orlandi, the general manager of Magical, and he will present a tool called Fair Venture. Thank you very much, Maria Paz. Well, I am the general manager of Magical, which is an incubator of startups, and we manage 2 private funds, and we work together with other partners to develop the Fair Venture tools, which seeks to make an intervention in startups in collaboration with venture capitals, because most of the algorithms which we interact come from startups funded by funds, and this has been exaggerating. I wasn't allowed to bring you more slides, but you can search with the keywords time to 1 million users, and that you will find a graph on how different solutions and algorithms that are on market, how much long it took them to reach 1 million users. And the growth has been exponential. Netflix was 3 years, and then Facebook, 10 months. ChatGPT took 5 days to reach 1 million users. And the competition of Twitter only took 1 hour, X. So it's crazy. So what's the idea? To place in the hands of venture capitals a tool that allows them as quickly as possible to identify gaps related to the ethical principles of acceptance, and also with the challenge that this tool needs to be able to be used by people who are not specialized in artificial intelligence ethics, so fund managers, basically. So that's one of the reasons why we did this. We created this, we worked in developing this tool with 5 funds. They're listed there, and we are thankful for their collaboration. And the idea was to make sure that we were speaking the same language, the business language, and also because we needed a tool that could be implemented at the various processes that the different funds have, because venture capital funds have processes that are quite standardized in terms of goals and the outputs. The more digital funds are 100, have online forms, and ranging also to other more traditional funds where we can just get together and I take notes. And we needed a tool that could be applied by all of them. So we obtained a lot of very positive feedback. Some of the funds that were participating tell us that the funds who have foreign limited partners who had already received requests to have some sort of assessment tool, and they were searching for this tool and they could not find it. Now, the concept of leveraged impact. So it made sense to work with the VCs because the door to venture capital is a stage where most of the startups who escalate at a massive range have to go through this. And this is one stage where the investment fund has a lot of leverage, and they demand the implementation of best practices that can be quite uncomfortable. For example, establishing for example, that the startup needs to reserve stock for key personnel. So it's very uncomfortable for the founders of the startups, and a lot of times the funds request this. And they also require a shareholders pact. So the idea was for the fund, with their leverage, that they could also demand to implement the gaps identified by the tool. And finally, why is this relevant? And one of the most important things in translations that we need, no matter how well intended the startup founders are, they have no time to save the world if they cannot save their companies. The fund manager has a lot of pressure to have a return of investment, and the startup founder has this pressure that not to go bankrupt. So I need to focus on this first and then save the world. So why is this relevant for you today? Because of course here in Chile we don't have really hard regulations that punish an algorithm that is not ethical. But no funds in Chile will invest in Chile in companies that will stay here. They all invest in companies that will go international, and they need to address these issues because in other more developed markets, non-compliance with these terms means that they can't operate, and there's of course reputational damage. and there's also a financial risk for venture capitals. So that's it. Almost 6 minutes. Sorry. Thank you very much, Juan. So these are the three pitches that we have of three very specific tools. In the case of ChileCompra, we will have a fourth pitch because they have two tools as part of this project. We have the ethical formulation guide, the standard bidding terms that are already published, and then the procurement uh, directive, and also the fair venture. And now Carolina Carrasco is here. She's a leading specialist of IDB Lab, and she's also the person who has promoted this from the IDB. Without her, this project would not be possible. And Cristobal Valdivieso, Assistant Director of People Development and Manager of the Civil Service. And he comes to strengthen all of the list of training that we need to implement with public employees. So this is our panel, and I would like to start with Carolina. Can you tell us why the IDB decided to join this project with the university, and how have you seen it evolve since 2020 until today that we have finally reached specific products? Well, thank you very much for the invitation. This is the end of a stage. Well, the beginning was, this is the start of a new phase that we hope to make this more deeper. Well, of course, like we said earlier, artificial intelligence is probably the most revolutionary tool that is affecting all areas of our lives after internet. So both service provision to citizens and also, well, practically everything that we do, health services, education, personnel selection, productivity improvements, etc., everything is been affected by AI. And as the IDB Group, since 2019, we have been working so that this new technology can be used in order to improve the quality of life of the population and not as and not to deepen discriminations or gaps. So that's why we launched the FAIR-like initiative, and we are supporting a lot of pilots that are trying to generate the capabilities to acquire and develop this technology by incorporating these ethical principles, and also to provide this and incorporating the ethical framework. So this ecosystem is very complex. It has to do with public procurement, private procurement, and also with all the institutions that support the development of these technologies, investment funds, acceleration projects, the academia, scientific research. So this project clearly lays the foundations, specific foundations, for the tools that can be implemented and replicated, but the challenge is still big. So there's still a lot of work to do. Yes, that's true. It's been several years and lots of challenges, and in between we have some failures as well. And Carolina has always encouraged us to achieve our goals. So Veronica, well, ChileCompra was the first to join this project, and you spoke about the benefits that the standard terms have for state buyers. But also I would like for you to tell us, at a public policy level, how can we insert the standard bidding terms? And how does it help private actors? Because there's two parts here in this relationship. Of course. Of course, there's two. Well, from my perspective in ChileCompra, today we have a public procurement law, which is new. There's a reform. It is about to be published. It was already enacted. So I give our example as ChileCompra because today, with the IDB, we are working on a loan in order to require artificial intelligence. Public agencies in general have not capable in terms of number of people or competencies to, well, we have the information, lots of information and data. If we put it together, we could do wonderful things and for the benefit of the citizens. But once we have this data and we are unable to process it, it's harder for us because we cannot continue to hire people. So what we need to do is to join this technology, like everybody else said, and this has allowed us to open up a field that was unimaginable. And within this, we are trying to help. We are helping by delivering these standard terms that allows public procurements to show in a more simple way what are the needs using a standardized framework. So buyers know what the state is requiring and how they reflect the data analysis needs, the artificial intelligence, but based on these ethical concepts that are important to convey and that need to be reflected in public procurement and also at the private sector. So we need to set an example. So as we incorporate all these technologies that would help us provide better services, we will also incorporate them in a simple way with standardized concepts, but also with an ethical foundation. So I don't know if this answers your question. Yes, I think standardization is key. I imagine that in the room, well, myself and all of us, we have applied to bids, and with the standard, the terms are always different. It just takes a lot of work just to understand what the state wants. So this standardization, we are thankful for it because once you overcome this barrier, it's a lot easier as a state provider to do the work. So, and this also helps to others to be wanting to work with the state because sometimes companies don't want to work with the state. So Jose, why do you think it is so relevant for public services to be updated and to catch up with these technologies? Why should they make use of intensive data use, and how does the guide contribute specifically to the use that public bodies need to do? Well, we have a lot of problems, you know. We have a waiting list in health about millions of people. The poverty levels are high. We have 0% growth. So I'm sorry to be so negative, but people here have a lot of problems, and the state needs to solve. And at least 30% of the time, the state is just wasting time because of technology. The decisions are bad because they're quite complex. So I can give you two examples. I met someone who was a cleaning person in some cabin. She had a daughter with something in her leg. She went to the hospital there. They took an x-ray. Nothing happened, but she was in pain. And, well, this person didn't make a lot of money, and she had to pay this herself. She had to pay a trauma person. And this person, the doctor looked at the x-ray, and there was an important fracture in the knee that could have been damaging this girl for the rest of her life. And of course, the person at the small hospital, the rural areas, didn't have the skills to understand the x-ray. So we have a lot of people who are not receiving assistance. Another example, a few years ago, we wanted to do a project. We need to find a lot of documents. There were surveillors. So guess where they wanted to surveil? They just did the easy part of the surveillance and omitted where the risk was. So what do I want to say with this? So we have huge problems everywhere. So if we don't jump on the technology train with a legal and ethical framework, millions of people will not receive the results and the benefits that they should. And the expectations are also growing. So of course, the satisfaction gaps could grow, and maybe eventually democracy could be a risk. So in summary, we need to make good progress in this with robust frameworks. But it is evident that the need is quite big, and we need to balance the opportunity and the risks. And that's why, again, I think the most important thing, maybe public policy, and of course in this project, that is to establish intelligent risk analysis, because the risk can be quite different. And in this sense, we should maybe publish a generic tool regarding this matter. But we need to be careful because we could prevent people from benefiting. So I would invite to have a conversation about this, a matrix, because I think this should be the next step. Of course, it would be beneficial to be able to identify use cases low risk and to encourage them and start to support problem resolution. So maybe we could have a first analysis about the public repository and maybe analyze, see what typologies. Well, of course, in Europe, they have made an analysis of this. So Cristobal, the civil service, joined the project in August at a stage when we noticed that we needed to strengthen our capacities. We will deploy the standard terms, also the ethical formulation guide. We have done synchronous trainings this year, and with you, we're developing training tools for next year. So what challenges do you see in this process that we are going to do when implementing the tools? How can we support the service? Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. The work that we have been doing for a while now, well, the challenge is complex because it's relating to people. This is not a discussion about information or platforms, because we tend to do that and make a caricature, but the challenge is to look at the process and install artificial intelligence within state management based on the logics of change management. So we have to raise awareness and bring these topics closer to the public officials. And this way we can have a shared vision about the scope and use of these tools within the state. The second thing is how to manage to convey the sense of purpose of these tools for decision making and for service provision to citizens. And it is very interesting. I think it's on January 15, we will deliver the results of surveys that we do with IDB funding and with Oxford. And it's interesting because we will have the results. We incorporated a question about how public officials are, how aware, and what do they know about using artificial intelligence. And I think it was about 25%, so this is quite interesting. And well, specifically in terms of support that we can provide as a civil service, well, Hugo and Daniela are here present. Campos, this is a great training academia in the state. It has currently 32 courses, and I think we will reach 50 or 55. And as part of them, there are 2 courses that we have been formulated regarding this project, formulation guide course and also a standard terms guide, and this will help incorporate this perspective in order to get know more about the tool and start implementing it. And also regarding awareness, we have a support plan for public officials, and it's interesting to use this space in order to show new trends at the state and form a critical mass about how this that seems to be so distant can be part of management. And it's also a supplementary line. We also have a plan that supports higher officials. So that's it. Thank you very much, Cristobal. This is well. The survey looks it's very interesting. Maybe we could replicate this and see how this knowledge and awareness is bettered. So Juan, this project has been quite visible in the public sector. Most of the partners are from that sector, but we have done great work with the private sector thanks to Magical. You talked about the Fair Venture tool. Throughout the year, we have had some tests, not only with the funds, but also with companies. So tell us about that process. What dimensions are hard for companies? What are your thoughts about the pilot? I think 43 companies have already tested this, tried this. Well, first of all, I think I saw Milan. Okay, he's the founder of NX, which is a stellar case in the implementation of this tool at a startup. And well, as part of this project, we formed the Association of Ethical Algorithms, and they helped us in the first stages of implementation. We also and we will be able we were able to identify the different visions and the different perspectives that we found as the startups completed the different stages of the implementation. And we noticed that one of the most difficult things to address and the most confusing ones was the time frame. Startups, a successful startup is that one that has a technological capacity and is able to adapt their product to the market needs. A lot of startups have an idea, oh, I had this great idea, let's do this, everybody will love this. And once they start to interact with the clients, business to business, I mean, startups who provide service to other companies, they realize that the needs are different and they have to pivot and change, adapt the product. So well, especially in B2B companies, it's harder for them to understand the magnitude that the products will reach. And they told me, well, I'm just doing a pilot. I need to evaluate this based on what's happening today, or should I evaluate this with a thinking about the future? It's hard for them to evaluate this without knowing if this is going to reach 1 million user in 1 year or 3 years. So apart from modify and adapt the tool to incorporate resources that can address these different perspectives, recommendations that we gave to the investment funds is to, when they implement the portfolio, so they have to implement this regularly because startups change their nature, their services change, they create new algorithms that previously did not exist when they joined the investment fund. Because sometimes at first they're just looking for a capital to develop something new, and then they apply the tool and the startup says, well, I'm not doing this. I will do it in the future, but not now. So that was one of the elements that we needed to address, and it was one of the most confusing points. Yes. So this is a work that needs to be constant. So you evaluate the risk, and when the conditions change, you do it again. Yes, it's content, and it's in the interest of the fund to do it, because when the startup joins other foreign markets, it's especially important. Thank you, Juan. So,
This project, as you see in the video, we did a lot of international promotion. Our partners have gone to Latin America to speak about it because this is never done before. What do you think we can export from Chile to the world, given our products and the learning or the lessons that we've had so far? Many aspects, as I see it. On the one hand, IDB Lab, for those that don't know, is the innovation lab of the IDB, and what we do there is to push frontier topics so as to plant a good seed that can be expanded upon. In this case, thanks to the GovLab program, we are trying to plant this seed in the public demand and the offer from the private sector. We have automated this IA algorithm so they can be developed and offered in a responsible manner. We are very happy to see the directive and the training program that they're doing and all the efforts that are making it the public offer more robust, and from the private we still have a lot of challenges. And the way we see it, the projects that we are receiving, most of them are based in self-made AI or leverage from generative ideas, and we have to support and ideas from Accenture or self-assessment, ethical self-assessment, and we have to create and implement more tools for ethical development of new AIs. So what we want to show different governments of the region the experience that we've had with public ethical procurement, and hopefully they will take this example and issue similar measures and use tools that are cost effective so we can expand adoption of the fair venture tool or the other programs that we have with some acceleration programs with the GovLab. Thanks, Carolina. In the region, we have the Science Ministry that had this AI ethical forum where we started a regional discussion where we will create a workshop and we have a space where we can spread, hopefully, our credo and to have other at the region, other countries have already submitted their own proposals. I wanted to ask Cristobal and maybe have the other comments as well. So here in our project, we have bodies that are those that dare, those organisms that are those early adopters, the innovative ones. However, to be able to do ethical use, we have to invite many more organizations. So how do you think, Cristobal, and the rest can also contribute? How can we invite and commit government executives to have this issue in their agenda? Ethical usage and liability for AIs. Okay, so the invitation that is socially responsible, it is important. So we have a moral aspect more so than the imperative of whether you believe or not of the scope of AI. So on the second, I will appeal to public ethical leadership. Then this is the view that we've tried to use as civil uh, servants. If you look at from the public leadership, the ethical component and the scope of the actions towards our citizens are relevant, and I think this subject goes along with that perfectly. And on the other hand, is the context and the invitation that we receive from the 2022-2026 agenda, and in the people area, there's competencies for the public sector and there's requirements, so we have to install this discussion, and for us to grow is vital. So if you would like to add, Jose, I think the strategies, data strategy, the modernization agent, how do we use those spaces to move this along? Yes, I think that I think we have a lot of data, uh, as it was mentioned, but most of the information has not been structured. It's not responsible enough because they're not massive algorithm. So to have higher applications are based in data. We have to have good quality data, data from the proper system where they're going to be used. So our top priority in digital transformation is database, and we do have a strategy, and it's quite simple. That it is to invite public institutions to have a responsible data governance, and to that end, we're working to make it more akin to the Chilean reality, because we are very behind in this topic in regards to data governance. If we have data, then we can do a lot. The first message, we do have data, but we have data in ChileCompra. But at digital government, we have data, but I think 10 or 20 institutions, but there are 1,200, and a great percentage of it have no data or good quality data. So we have to continue leadership from the Ministry of Science and the digital government, that we are doing great strides on that. We're doing a circular floor where we are updating some recommendations that will appear in the guidelines. And I think that my message, just as the Ministry of Science has said, we have to be able to balance innovation towards and service for the people against risk. We cannot just take the risk without opportunities, and we have to develop the tools that we need to manage this balance, and that is what we need right now. At least from digital government, we feel we have a lot of opportunities, and there's a lot of room to grow and to better serve the peoples. And we have to work with more enthusiasm in that regard. Thanks, Jose. We have a space. If anybody wants to give a 30-second comment to close off. Only to the last words, we have a lot of data, and even though they're not structured, but here from 2030, we may be able to have them. I think we have to work in parallel. But another thing is to start using all these technologies so we can translate that data into information that is useful, and that is what we're talking about. Yes, we have to follow this ethical alignment to use the tools. We have type templates, now have to spread that. We are doing it along with you, and we're doing it with the civil servants. We're going to be spreading next year the new law. We're going to be adding these concepts and make it easier to buy this technology, but it has to be ethical one, and that's where we have to be looking for in the future. Thank you very much. Okay then, please a round of applause. So we ask the panel to wait for the picture, but in the meantime, please, you can go and have a coffee in our patio, and we come back 11:35 with Rafaela's exposition. Thank you.